Welcome to Capital Catch-Up, your in-depth guide to congressional action. I am Victor.
And I am Leanie. Today we are diving deep into several significant legislative proposals, nominations, and committee activities. Let us start with healthcare, where we are seeing several bipartisan efforts to tackle cost and transparency. First up is Senate Bill 2355, known as the Patients Deserve Price Tags Act.
This bill is a major push for consumer empowerment. It mandates that hospitals and clinical diagnostic laboratories publicly disclose their standard charges, discounted cash prices, and payer-specific negotiated rates. They have to put this in a standardized, machine-readable format so patients can easily compare prices for shoppable services. To make sure hospitals actually comply, senior officials must attest to the accuracy, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services can impose significant daily civil monetary penalties.
That is a big deal for anyone who has ever been shocked by a medical bill. Along similar lines of patient cost relief, we have Senate Bill 864, the Help Ensure Lower Patient Copays Act, or the Help Copays Act. This bill, introduced on March 5, 2025, addresses out-of-pocket healthcare costs by requiring health insurance plans to count third-party financial assistance toward a patient's annual deductibles and out-of-pocket limits.
Right, so if a patient receives support from a nonprofit organization or a pharmaceutical manufacturer, that assistance counts as a valid contribution toward their cost sharing. This is especially helpful for specialty and utilization-managed prescription drugs. It also sets up a safe harbor provision for high-deductible health plans to keep them compliant. If passed, it would take effect for plan years starting on or after January 1st, 2026.
We also have a bill focused on a major public health crisis, sepsis. Sepsis claims 350,000 lives annually in the United States, and Senate Bill 1929, the Sepsis Act, aims to reduce those rates. Since early detection is key, the bill mandates a dedicated sepsis team within the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to lead national education campaigns, improve pediatric data collection, and standardize clinical outcomes.
It also creates a voluntary honor roll program to recognize hospitals implementing effective sepsis protocols, drawing from successful state models like Rory's regulations. The bill authorizes $20 million in annual funding through 2030 to back these initiatives.
Speaking of healthcare and families, Senate Bill 2131, the Dads Matter Act of 2025, is a bipartisan proposal to improve maternal and infant health outcomes. It requires the Secretary of Health and Human Services to launch a public awareness campaign promoting father inclusion and engagement during pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum.
Yes, it highlights how engaged fathers positively impact prenatal care, breastfeeding success, and early detection of complications. It also directs the government to guide states on training healthcare providers to better involve fathers, and mandates a Government Accountability Office study to evaluate the program's effectiveness.
Now let us pivot to some civil rights and tax-related changes. Senate Bill 2129, the Safe Tax Filing Act of 2025, is a bipartisan bill aimed at helping survivors of domestic abuse and spousal abandonment. It allows these individuals to file their federal income taxes as unmarried or as heads of households, even if they are still legally married, provided they live apart from their spouse and meet specific criteria.
The bill establishes clear definitions for domestic abuse, including physical, emotional, and economic control, to remove tax barriers that might otherwise trap victims. On the other hand, we have Senate Bill 2343, the Restoring Equal Opportunity Act. This bill seeks to amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Fair Housing Act by explicitly prohibiting legal claims based on disparate impact.
Exactly. It would eliminate liability for employment and housing practices that are neutral on their face but result in a disproportionate effect on protected groups. The bill restricts legal action solely to cases involving intentional discrimination and would nullify existing federal regulations that allow for disparate impact enforcement.
Moving on to government transparency, we have two bills targeting the court system. Senate Bill 1146, the Cameras in the Courtroom Act, is a bipartisan effort to require the Supreme Court to televise its open sessions, unless a majority of the justices decide that doing so would violate the due process rights of the parties involved.
And Senate Bill 1133, the Sunshine in the Courtroom Act of 2025, is another bipartisan proposal. This one grants federal appellate and district court judges the discretion to permit media coverage, including photographing, recording, and broadcasting. It includes strict safeguards, such as prohibiting the broadcasting of jurors, protecting attorney-client confidentiality, and requiring guidelines to obscure the identities of vulnerable witnesses. Notably, the authority for district courts has a 3-year sunset provision.
Turning to economic development and history, Senate Bill 1459 is the Historic Tax Credit Growth and Opportunity Act of 2025. This bill expands the federal historic rehabilitation tax credit to incentivize preserving historic buildings. It allows the full 20% credit in the year a building is placed in service, increases the credit to 30% for smaller projects with higher caps in rural areas, and lets taxpayers transfer these credits.
Sticking with history, Senate Bill 675, the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library Act, authorizes the Secretary of the Interior to offer up to $50 million in federal grants to support the library in Medora, North Dakota. However, the Library Foundation must first secure at least $100 million from non-federal or state sources. The federal funds cannot be used for ongoing maintenance or operations, but federal agencies like the National Park Service can loan artifacts for public exhibition.
Let us look at national security and industry. Senate Bill 1541, the Ships for America Act of 2025, is a major proposal to revitalize the United States maritime industry. It aims to strengthen strategic sealift capabilities and address declining domestic shipbuilding capacity. Key provisions include establishing a maritime security trust fund, financial incentives for shipyards, and workforce programs like student loan forgiveness and modernized credentialing for merchant mariners.
In technology security, Senate Bill 1705, the Chip Security Act, requires the Secretary of Commerce to mandate security mechanisms, such as location verification, for advanced integrated circuits and computing hardware exported from the United States. This is designed to prevent theft, diversion, or unauthorized tampering.
There is also Senate Bill 1283, the Innovate to De-escalate Modernization Act, which updates federal firearms laws to distinguish conventional firearms from modern, less-than-lethal projectile devices. It defines and exempts specific non-lethal devices from firearm restrictions to encourage de-escalation tools.
And for sports fans, Senate Bill 2265, America's Olympic and Paralympic Games Commemorative Coins Act, directs the Treasury to mint commemorative gold, silver, and clad coins for the 2028 Los Angeles Games and the 2034 Salt Lake City Winter Games. Surcharges from the coin sales will support the organizing committees and youth and elite sports, keeping the programs cost-neutral to the federal government.
Finally, Senate Bill 178, the Ensuring Accurate and Complete Abortion Data Reporting Act of 2025, seeks to standardize and mandate abortion statistics reporting to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It ties federal Medicaid funding for family planning services to a state's compliance with submitting standardized data, including maternal demographics, gestational age, and procedure type.
Now let us shift to nominations. We have several notable names put forward. Darrell Owens has been nominated to be the United States representative to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, with the rank of ambassador. Catherine Bowles is nominated to be an Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs, succeeding Naz Durakoglu, who resigned.
On the judicial front, we have Arthur Roberts Jones and John George Edward Mark nominated to be United States District Judges for the Southern District of Texas. They would succeed Ricardo H. Hinojosa and Michaela Alvarez, respectively, who have retired. Additionally, Michael J. Hendershot is nominated to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of Ohio, succeeding the retired Patricia A. Gothan.
Speaking of judicial matters, the Senate Judiciary Committee held hearings on June 24, 2026, to examine the nominations of Daniel Desmond Domenico to be United States Circuit Judge for the 10th Circuit, Matthew R. Byrne to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of Ohio, and Konstantinos Ligris to be an Assistant Attorney General.
On the same day, June 24, 2026, the House Homeland Security Committee held a meeting to discuss a wide array of legislation. They covered House Resolution 3106, the Weatherizing Infrastructure in the North and Terrorism Emergency Readiness Act of 2025, and House Resolution 5109, which aims to improve returning citizens, access to the Transportation Worker Identification Credential Program.
They also discussed House Resolution 5517, the Northern Border Security Enhancement and Review Act, House Resolution 7427, the Safe Visits Act, and House Resolution 7436, the Department of Homeland Security Intelligence and Analysis Training Act.
That is right. Along with House Resolution 7443, the I&A Emission Reorientation Act of 2026, House Resolution 7448, the Modernizing and Improving the National Terrorism Advisory System Act of 2026, and House Resolution 7574, the ELO Realignment and Strategic Engagement Reform Act of 2026.
The committee also reviewed House Resolution 8168, the Major Non-NATO Ally Terror Threat Assessment Act, House Resolution 8535, the Measuring Illicit Fentanyl Trafficking Act, House Resolution 8770, the Safeguards Act of 2026, and House Resolution 8874, the Homeland Security Capabilities Preservation Reporting Act of 2026.
And they did not stop there. The agenda also included House Resolution 8897, the Improving Travel for American Families Act, House Resolution 9327, the Pearl Act, House Resolution 9328, the Improving Travel for Military Members Act, House Resolution 9382, the Nexus for Families Act, House Resolution 9388, the One-Stop Pilot Program Extension Act, House Resolution 9394, the Civil Preparedness.
To round out our update, let us look at the congressional record from June 22, 2026. This session focused on routine administrative tasks, including appointing a speaker pro tempore, a formal prayer, and approving the previous day's journal.
The session also featured executive communications, including State Department arms export notifications, Labor Department financial reporting rules, and Federal Aviation Administration airworthiness directives. Members also introduced new bills addressing the workplace integration of artificial intelligence, border security processes, financial institution regulations, disability account adjustments, and the labeling of lab-created food products.
Looking ahead, listeners should keep an eye on how these major healthcare transparency and copay bills progress through committee, the outcome of the Senate judicial nomination hearings, and whether the House Homeland Security bills move to the floor.
That is all for today's episode of Capital Catch-Up. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.